So welcome everybody to the All Academy Theme PDW session number 456 on bridging the divide between rigorous research and relevance to society, policy making, and practice. It's the perspectives of the Academy of Management Fellows. Let me show you what will be the structure of our session, but first let me say what is the purpose or the goal of this session. So our purpose is to explore how to bridge between rigor and relevance. How can we integrate the two, ensure knowledge for management research is useful for policies and management practice toward a better world. The Academy of Management theme PDW involves two synchronous panels composed of Academy of Management Fellows, followed by question on chat and answers, and breakout rooms for active discussions. Panel A will focus on ensuring the rigorous research is relevant for practice, and panel B will focus on how practical problems contribute to enable the rigorous research. So Sitkin is going to present the panelists, but before I present the panelists, let me go over the structure. So we're going to start, Sim is going to start in 5 minutes. The panel is going to begin at 6:10 a.m. East Coast to 6:35, and 5 panelists will present their viewpoints. Then we are going to have 10 minutes question on chat and answer by panelists. And Moran Lazar is going to facilitate and let the panelists know what are the questions on the chat. Then we're going to have breakout room for 20 minutes, and it will be random assignment. And in each room, there will be one panelist. And after that, we are going to go back to the main room, and each group will report one good idea for bridging the divide, the gap between rigor and relevance. So the second panel begins at 7:10 a.m. East Coast. Again, Sim Sitkin is going to present the panelists. We are going to have the panel from 7:15 to 7:45, and then again question and answers from 7:45 to 7:55. And again, breakout rooms from 7:55 to 8:15. If we have 5 minutes, then we'll do an open sharing. And if not, we'll switch to the closing remark by Ann Tsui. So this is going to be the structure of this session. Please stay with us and ask questions on chat to the panelists. And let's hope that at the end of this panel will start to see more research that bridges the relevance and rigor. So let me ask Sim Sitkin, who actually is in his son's wedding today. So he recorded it in advance, and he's going to present the panelists of panel A.
It's my pleasure to introduce our first panel, focusing on rigorous research and how to translate that into practice. Our first panelist, Kim Cameron from the University of Michigan, will talk about how research can have effects on crucial societal and organizational problems. Following him, Xiao-Ping Chen from the University of Washington will examine how research can serve as a guide to solve problems that managers face within their organizations. Third speaker will be Gilad Chen from the University of Maryland, who will talk about the importance of creating an ecology in the research community which values quality in both rigor and relevance. The fourth speaker, Rob Folger from the University of Central Florida, will examine the issue of how pure theory, even pure theory, can drive rigorous research that leads to adoption by practitioners. And then the final panelist in this session is Carrie Leana from the University of Pittsburgh, and she will discuss how important it is to acknowledge the context in which the research occurs and the practice occurs in order to obtain that combination of rigor and impact. Each panelist will have 5 minutes, followed by an opportunity for a Q&A. Let's welcome the panelists.
Thank you, Sim. Sim and Sim Sitkin, Ansui, and myself are actually the organizers of this session. So the first panelist, I know that he had some problems connecting. Kim Cameron from University of Michigan, who plans to talk about empirically based interventions in organizations. Kim, let us know if you are already here.
Kim unfortunately has not joined us.
Kim unfortunately has not joined us. It is unfortunate because he was going to tell us about 5 intervention studies that he conducted. Maybe he will be able to join us a little bit later. So we'll move to the second speaker. It's Xiao-Ping Chen, and she's going to focus on the title From Rigors to Research to Practice. Unfortunately, she is in Seattle now, sleeping. So she also had to send her a video for us. And
good morning, everyone. My name is Xiao-Ping Chen. I'm a professor at the University of Washington. Sorry that I cannot join the session live, but I'm recording my sharing here with you. So regarding this particular topic, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Many years ago, we established the association called International Association for Chinese Management Research. We have an extensive executive board for the association, and every other year we will have a conference. So I remember very vividly in one of the meetings with the executive board members, we asked them to what extent that you guys, read our top tier management journals and our articles, and how impactful our research findings to your practice. And one executive was very, very honest, and he said, we never read your articles, and we never think about to apply your research findings in our practice. We will come up with our own ways of solving problems. So I felt very disappointed and also a little bit sad, because we as scholars spend so much time and effort and resources into our research. But at the end, what is the impact that we make in the real management practice? So I remember Ansui and we discussed this issue, and we thought we need to come up with some kind of solution. So the solution was, of course, there are many ways, to translate rigorous research to practice, but our solution was to actually establish or to publish a magazine. At the time, it was called Chinese Management Insights. And later on, it's morphed to Management Insights. So this was sort of our answer to the question. So now I'm going to talk about this magazine in particular. It's a bilingual magazine published quarterly in Chinese and annually in English. And what we do in this magazine, or the mission, is to really build a bridge between the academics and practitioners. And secondly, transmitting cutting-edge research findings and business practices to a broader audience. So these are the covers of the issues that we have published so far. And in more detail, because I only have 5 minutes, I need to go pretty quickly. So we have a forward, an idea scan, research highlights, executive interviews, and featured topics, and also column essays, book reviews, and cross-boundary entrepreneurs report these things to our readers. So in particular, in terms of translating cutting-edge research findings into something that would be useful for management practitioners, I'm going to highlight a few columns. So one is Management Scholars Bookshelf. this is the name for this column, in which we ask management scholars, that is you guys, to recommend a book or several books that at the time you feel that was extremely helpful for you to understand what's going on in this world, and you think it will be extremely important for the managers to understand. So this is one way we do that. And the second one is what we call research highlights. So basically what we do is to rewrite research papers published in top-tier management journals, and then rewrite them and interpret the findings in the language that can be easily understood by practitioners. So like this is about bamboo ceiling paper. This is about how to break the stereotype that people have about gender in different professions. And this is about the collectivism and the dark side of collectivism. That is, they actually are more alert to the insiders of the team. And in terms of executive interviews, we have interviewed, I think, maybe 50 top business leaders in China. We particularly focus on Chinese business leaders because these people, our readers, will feel more close and understanding. But we are also exploring, actually interviewing foreign CEOs and founders to share their management wisdom. Another thing that we do every year, we have a special, like one issue, focusing on a sort of hot management topic that has been discussed in research in our journals. So for example, on voice, there are a lot of research findings. So we sort of summarize them, introduce them to our readers, and combined in combination with real life examples to illustrate the key constructs and so on and so forth. And this is about emotional labor. This is a group think. This is job stress and burnout. So here I actually use this opportunity to also ask for your contribution. One thing you can do is to make recommendation of your favorite books. And also you can recommend your own articles or other scholars' recent papers that can impact Chinese managers' thinking and behavior. And we will have them rewritten in English and in Chinese. And also, I encourage you to contribute your own essays. So we do have this scholar column essay place that publish these essays. So if you can write something that summarize your insights that you think can benefit Chinese managers, please send them to me. Okay, so this is what I prepared for you. Thank you so much. And I will hope to receive your recommendations and your essays.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. And our next speaker is Gilad Chen from University of Maryland. And let's hear Gilad.
Yes, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So I like the topic of this session. I think that it's an important discussion to see whether we're integrating between practical problems and basic research. And one framework that I particularly like in this discussion is what I show here on the right, which is this taken from a book by Stokes, where he described different quadrant, if you will, of conducting research, from basic research in the top left, which is very high in rigor, not necessarily high in relevance, to research which is more user-inspired, which is high on rigor and relevance, which I think is the purpose of this session, is to try to encourage that. All the way to using knowledge, which is the Edison quadrant, if you will, which is little care for rigor and a lot care for relevance. So, in my opinion, we need all quadrants, and I actually very much disagree with the notion that much of the research in management is low on relevance. I think that that's not an accurate reflection. I think that in reading our journals from even some of the more basic journals like Journal of Personality, Social Psychology, all the way to the academy journals. I think that the relevance is almost always there. I don't think that a lot of the research that we do is free of relevance. However, I think that some of the research that we do is more with an eye toward the Bohr quadrant, okay, for basic research, and others may be more applied. And I think that for a healthy science, particularly user-inspired science like management, I think you need to be receptive of all of these quadrants. The key, which I'm really glad of what Xiao-Ping has just mentioned, the key is to translate. The key is to have more interface between even basic researchers, basic scientists, and the applied world. One place where we often do that is in managerial education. So when we teach MBA students, executives, when we do research that is in organization, we're often faced with the need to connect from basic and applied research and applied problems. And I think that's something that, at least for me, has been very, very useful. So I think that the translation part allows us to navigate across the quadrants. And then just one final point, I think that it is important to realize that even though you may pick up an article and ask yourself, what's the immediate relevance of that article, you may not find an answer right away, but it's important to realize that basic knowledge can take time to get translated, okay? So we've seen it now with the pandemic, for example, that years and decades of basic research in immunology and basic biology, basic chemistry has now been used to solve applied problem. That's one example. Even within this quadrant, even Bohr is the Nobel laureate that conducted the basic research that later was used by the Manhattan Project to come up with the atomic bomb, and which is obviously disastrous, but also a lot of the positive of creating atomic energy. That took decade to go from the basic research to the applied usefulness of it. And I think it's important to realize that even basic research can eventually become useful over time. And let me just end with a sort of a funny little example of that. Next slide, please. So this is kind of like a little silly example, but it strikes me that in a movie, The Martian, Matt Damon here, who was basically left for his own on Mars. He was a botany expert, botanist, and he used a lot of botany, basic knowledge in botany to adapt as an astronaut in Mars. And the movie kind of illustrates that. That's a silly little example, but it shows how we would never think that knowledge of botany would enable work adaptation, and yet here we are in this movie as an example. So that's an extreme example, but I just want us to think about how even basic research can become applied relevance to applied problem. It just takes translation and it takes time. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Gilad. It's a very nice example. And let's move to Robert Folger from University of Central Florida. Rob, please share with us.
This focus on rigor and relevance is inspiring renewed energy towards the unification of the theoretical and the practical. And so I'm only going to add a footnote on the theme of nothing so practical as a good theory, the old Kurt Lewin slogan. When we study practical problems with all of the rigor of the research methodology and statistics we've developed, let's not let the bright luster of our methods blind us to the importance of thinking about underlying theoretical constructs. In other words, sometimes what we think makes us more rigorous actually only leads to rigor mortis. Sometimes we think we have to have very complex models with umpteen variables and multiple paths showing moderated mediation hither, thither, and yon, which could backfire. Sometimes maybe increased model complexity detracts from the applicability we could have otherwise. Let me give an example from my own experience, namely conceptualizing fairness as a process in terms of an underlying foundational construct. Voice, PJ there on the slide stands for procedural justice. And I'm going to talk about voice in the form of self-appraisal. The example involves a chapter that I did on what we called a due process model of performance appraisal. And I'd circulated copies, working copies, of draft for quite a while. And here's what happened as a result. The same day I received the book with a chapter, with our chapter in it on that model, I also got a copy in the mail of a manuscript from Susan Taylor presenting the results of a quasi-experimental confirmation of the model. Now, 20 years later, a literature review said this about it. There have been many tests of the due process approach to performance measurement, performance management, with consistent and important findings, leading researchers to conclude that those experiencing a due process performance appraisal system perceive their ratings as fairer and more accurate, or more satisfied with the process in their rating, and rate their managers more favorably. Plus, there are positive effects for managers too, such as better conflict resolution, more satisfaction with the performance management process, and more job satisfaction. Now, before we introduced that idea, the construct, there had been lots of mind-numbingly rigorous research on performance reviews, all focused on what we call the test metaphor, which likens performance appraisal to test construction and assumes work arrangements will allow reliable and valid measurement, raters will assess performance accurately, and a rational unitary criterion exists. In other words, just use the most rigorous scientific methodologies and statistics to construct and validate your performance measurement instrument, and then all will be hunky-dory. I held an HR position when I was writing the chapter, and I didn't have a chance to do all that. I had 7 people to schedule for performance reviews. Here's how I operationalized voice in line with this due process approach. I sent them each a blank copy of the same performance review document I'd be using to rate them. I asked them to do their own self-appraisal and bring it to the meeting with them, where we'd sit down and compare the two side by side. Now, that's just an anecdote, so it's obviously not rigorous for me to talk about what happened. So instead, I'm just going to quote from the published version of the quasi-experimental test that Susan Taylor did, reported in Administrative Science Quarterly. She found the same thing that I found in my own experience, that even though the due process employees actually received lower evaluations, they displayed more favorable reactions. Perceived system fairness, appraisal accuracy, attitudes towards the system, the evaluation of managers, and intention to remain with the organization. Now, those results, I argue, came from a simple change to a theoretical construct about the underlying psychological processes that were having an important but overlooked role in an applied context, not a change in the methods of investigating them. So I started with a quote from Kurt Lewin. I'll close with Einstein. The remark that's often attributed to him goes something like, everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. Turns out that's apocryphal. What we actually have recorded in his published words are from the journal Philosophy of Science. He put it this way: the goal of all theory is to make the irreducible basic elements as simple and as few as possible without having to surrender the adequate representation of a single datum of experience. So my summary slide puts it in this way. I like to alliterate things. We need carefully conceptualized, concise constructs, not just fancy methods and life-altering statistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. It's I was also thinking about Kurt Lewin when I saw your one slide, and Kurt Lewin actually developed his theory by solving a real problem at the time in the Second World War in the US. That was a shortage of meat, and there was a need to change the food habits of the population. And he developed his theory of the field theory and the theory of change from deep freezing, freeze, and refreeze based on the relevant research that he was doing at the time. Thank you, Rob. And I invite Carrie Leana to talk to us, to share with us rigor and relevance.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Anne and Sim and Miriam for putting this session together. I'm just put up one slide of some thoughts that, might be relevant here. And at 6:25 in the morning, Eastern time, I hope they're rigorous as well. A couple of thoughts I have on this topic and why I've gotten involved with this responsible research in management, and why I'm so pleased that the Academy Management Fellows have gotten involved with it. One thing that and again, this is kind of my random thoughts on what other people might find interesting, or how to do work that is both rigorous and relevant. The first thought I have is to pick your topic with an eye towards social good, however you define that. I mean, one of the wonderful things about our profession and about what we do is that we have agency in this, that it's difficult to do research well and to do research with a lot of rigor, but you also can choose the kinds of questions that you want to investigate. And that is a wonderful privilege. And so I urge everybody not to squander that it's one of the reasons many of us get into this field, is because we want to see organizations do a better job. We want people to be treated better at work. So I think picking your questions and your topics with that in mind is very important, both for your own motivation and also to make what we do relevant. The second thought I have is that, what we do best, what we're trained to do, is rigor. And our role, as I see it at least, is to provide the science that undergirds positive change. And so, there's no substitute for the rigor. It's kind of our role in this social ecosystem. So the rigor is I think, must be there. It's a necessary condition. It may not be sufficient for relevance, but it's certainly necessary. A third point, and something I've found in my own work, is applying for external funding really makes you take into consideration the relevance. It's this quote market test, that what you're doing is not just relevant to the handful of other people that are doing the same thing you are, but also has an impact, a larger impact. And it really forces you to make that case. And in making that case, it forces you to think about it a whole lot more. So I would advise everybody, and I realize in business schools, external funding is perhaps not as rewarded as it is in psychology departments, et cetera. But applying for external funding, I think, is a really good exercise for all of us in terms of this rigor and relevance. The other thing I've done is I've worked a lot with people outside of my field in medicine and education and economics, public health, et cetera. And I think it's another way to really kind of ensure that what you're doing speaks to a wider audience. Again, kind of my assumption is what you're doing is going to be good. It's going to be rigorous, that the journals that we publish in are going to require that. So I guess my focus here is more on this relevance and how do you think about making your work more relevant. Let me just close with a couple of examples from my own work. One was a project I did several years ago in the New York City public schools, and I put a couple of the citations up there. So these were papers that were published in top management journals. But what I always try to do with a big project, and I tend to do big field projects, that I always write a translation of those. And my favorite translation vehicle now is tends to be Stanford Social Innovation Review, but there's lots of other journals and magazines and outlets where you can look at your work, do the science, but also translate that science for practitioners so that it can be used. Another project, and one I'm still very much involved with, is a project on financial precarity. And by this, I mean people that are worried about money and worried about paying the bills and how that affects the way they behave at work and the way they, all aspects of their lives. And again, what I've done is done the empirical papers, the theoretical papers, and published them in our top journals. But again, done the translation so that practitioners can pick up that research and apply it as they want to. And I think what Gilad said earlier is really kind of, this is my example of it, that this translation is really, really important, that we're good at what we do, we're good at the rigor, but we maybe don't think so much outside of ourselves. And Anne and others through the Responsible Research and Management initiatives is really kind of trying to get us to do that more. So it's not, if people don't read the top tier management journals, it's not that there's not interesting and important things that can really change society for the better. It's that perhaps we haven't spoken about those in a way that people can pick up and use. So I would urge you, when you're doing big projects, publish absolutely in the top tier journals, because that's the market test too of rigor. But take that extra step and translate those through presentations, through publications, et cetera. So I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your advice. I think it's an excellent advice, and we also try to do it. And it echoes very nicely on what Xiao-Ping shared with us before. Thank you, Leana. And now we have, let me first check if Kim Cameron will manage to connect. Anyone? Kim, are you there?
Kim is with us.
Kim is here?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going back to your presentation. I'm glad you're here, and please share with us about your interventions.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and I'm sorry for not, I don't know why I couldn't get on, but I kept trying and eventually I did. Great. So it may be my system in some way, but anyway, thank you very much for giving me a chance to participate. And
we are happy you are with us.
It's good to see many of you I haven't seen for a long time. Miriam, can you animate this slide?
We decided not to animate. I
that's
it
fine.
And then I de-animated it.
That's just fine. That's just fine. So let me use this one slide.
Okay.
My own research has been on the topic of positive organizational scholarship. Organizational primarily refers to the fact that the outcomes that I'm interested in are organization level outcomes, because the number one objection I have is from individuals, from senior executives, from engineers, from attorneys is, this is soupy, syrupy, saccharine sweet stuff. There's no substance here. It's, somebody called it happy clappy material. And nobody cares. It's consultant speak. It's airport bookstore advice and so on. So the number one objective I've had is to try to identify honest to goodness, valid, empirically based outcomes from positive practices. Positive practices, there are a variety of positive practices, but let me just tell you some of the things that have happened in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so. It's very difficult to see these letters or the words on this slide are too small, but the upper left-hand corner, one particular organization happened to be called Prudential Financial. Financial organizations are interested only in bottom line impact. I mean, that's that. If they don't make money, they're in big trouble. The CEO of Prudential Financial, John Kim, happened to learn about positive leadership, positive practices, decided to implement it in a merger. They were merging with their chief rival. The prediction was that they would lose a lot of customers because they were the rivals, that it would be a difficult go. They implemented positive practices. The results were not only a successful merger, it went from losses to a 20% annual growth rate, which is 4 times industry average, kept 95% of their clients and so on. Major success, and he attributed it to these positive practices, which are measured in 2 ways. One, objectively, that is what happens behaviorally on the spot. And the second is by way of survey instrument. Down in the lower right-hand corner, the 8 dimensions of positive practices are listed there. The middle, top middle, another one of the Prudential businesses was struggling. They appointed Jim Malazzi as the new CEO. He also, because he'd been working in Prudential Financial, said, okay, I want to do this in this organization as well, Prudential Real Estate, and see whether or not we can turn it around. So they had just lost $210 million in the last 2 years. And excuse me, high turnover, low morale, they were losing people right and left. Implemented positive practices. 12 months later, they went from a $70 million loss in 6 months when he took over. They were losing $70 million to a $20 million profit in less than 12 months. Scores went up in 9 out of 10 categories in their climate survey. They won the J.D. Power Award for quality of service, earned 2 times business plan, and so on. I mean, major success. Upper right-hand corner, the Rocky Flats nuclear arsenal, identified as the single worst, most polluted place on the American continent. They were making the triggers that went into nuclear weapons during the Cold War. Well, George Herbert Walker Bush shut it down, saying Cold War's over, we're not going to produce these things anymore, so we got to clean up and close Rocky Flats. Nobody's ever done that in the history of the world. So they brought a blue ribbon commission together of experts from all over the world, asked for an estimate. How long is it going to take and what's it going to cost to clean up and close Rocky Flats? Now they're dealing with plutonium, enriched uranium, transradic acid, beryllium, and so on, things that kill you. The estimate was 70 years, $36 billion to complete it. I interviewed the Secretary of Energy for the federal government. He said that's a gross underestimate. It's likely to take 200 years and several $100 billion. Well, implementing positive practices, again, and these are all documented, this one in a book, for example, called Making the Impossible Possible. They completed that job 60 years early, 30 billion under budget, 13 times cleaner than required by federal standards. I mean, such a dramatic success, hardly anybody in the DOE, the Department of Energy, could even believe it. Lower left-hand corner.
Maybe we will stop him
Is
because
that 5 minutes? Am I up?
No, it's over time now, so maybe
okay, overtime. So the whole point of that is when people become convinced that they are that they can actually implement what we do. I don't have to convince people to implement. When I show them the data, they say, okay, let's try this. And sure enough, over and over and over again, dramatic results occur. So rigorous research, when applied, has big impact. And I think there's a whole bunch of data that makes that case. Sorry to go over. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. These are very good examples of how rigorous research makes a significant impact on industry and companies. Thank you very much. So now, let me just move the cursor. What happened to my cursor? Just a second. Okay, now we have a 10-minute question and answers to the panelists. And Moran Lazar, soon to be Dr. Moran Lazar, is going to facilitate and let the panelists know about the questions. Moran, we're waiting for you.
Hi, everyone. So please, if you have questions, just write them down in the chat. If the question is directed to a specific panelist, just let us know. So just to kick off the conversation, there has been a lot of interesting things you said in the chat already. One question was about involving practitioners in the journal publication process and whether this could change the way we translate our findings to a wider audience. So if one of the panelists has something to share.
Who wants to answer?
Yeah, I'll jump in. There was a lot of chat on that. I vehemently oppose that idea. I think that for two reasons. One, I think that it would dilute the ecology I was talking about. I think that we need to focus on rigorous research. We need to focus on user-inspired research. We need to focus on translation. But I think where the practitioner use is most useful in most cases, not all, is in the translation part and in the discussion between basic and user-inspired researchers and the applied problem. I think that if our goal in rigorous research is to have practitioners review it, I think that would end up diluting the science, and I think that would ruin that ecology. Plus, I don't think we have a lot of practitioners. We have very, very select few practitioners in a field who would be even willing to contribute in that manner. So that's my opinion.
Any other response?
The only thing I would say is that often when we think of practitioners, we think just of managers. And I, again, think of this responsible research as not just the interests of business and and their agents and managers, but also other people in society. So I'm not sure having managers vet our work is, I think that could be a double-edged sword.
I'll add to that and underline my agreement with what Carrie and Gilad have said. The number one objection to what we do is that there's no substance. I mean, it's very easy to have our field taken over by consultants, charlatans, individuals without substance, people who say, gee, I read that article in Harvard Business Review, I could do that. And they give a motivational speech. That's fine, but the substance, the empirical validity, the evidence, and then also the nuances that come from rigorous research are all left aside. And I think it's easy to lose credibility unless there's real substance. And I think that's our job. So I really agree. Translating, writing it so that somebody could understand it is our major challenge. I even look at the titles in our journals, and I sometimes say to myself, who in the world created that title? I mean, it makes no sense to me. So even titling, I mean, I'm thinking about newspapers try to capture you by the title of the article. I think we maybe ought to take some lessons from folks who know how to make titles of articles.
Thank you. Moran, we have time to one more question, maybe.
Yes, a lot of interesting questions, but we only have 2 minutes left. So there is one question about focusing too much on relevance in research and whether this can go at the cost of basic research. Would like to have your take on that.
Good question. Anyone wants to respond?
Let me give it a try. I think there's a lot of confusion about the word relevance. Most of the conversation I've heard is about how do you translate our research findings to practice. That's not the only definition. The more important definition that we are trying to suggest and clarify is that is the topic of our research relevant for the world at all? Or is it only a topic that we as individual researchers believe that I am interested, doesn't matter anybody else interested in, doesn't matter whether it has any meaning for anyone else or for society, or as long as it is acceptable, most likely to be acceptable by the journals, by the reviewers, editors. We are trying to say is that as responsible researchers, we have to think about ultimately who are the consumers of the knowledge we are producing. So choice of topics is the number one. If you have chosen a topic that really is meaningful for business, for nonprofit, whatever, then you have relevance already and apply the rigorous methods. Then whether it's basic research, applied research, that will potentially be, at least the idea is useful, and if not, practically can be used. So relevance is about choice of topics. So that's what I want to contribute to the idea.
Thank you. I think it's very important to emphasize it.
Can I add to that, Mia?
Yes,
I
sure.
completely agree. I completely agree with Anne that relevance is not the translation part. Translation is a process, not the content. It is about the choice of topics. Where Anne and I may disagree is on the assessment of topics that we publish. I'm much more optimistic and believe that most of the topics that we publish are relevant. It's just that there's pieces that our job in translation is not just to take a full article and translate, but also take pieces and assemble them into a meaningful translation.
Thank you, Gilad.
Could I say one last thing just from the chat, that there was a lot of talk about behavioral science and policy, and I'm the senior editor in the organizations area. We get almost no submissions. They get a lot of submissions in behavioral economics, et cetera, but we get almost nothing in organizational science. So send your papers.
Thank you. So I think to keep the time, maybe we should stop with the question and answer. Maybe later on we can just download the questions and see if we can answer them after the session itself. But now there is another opportunity to discuss these questions during the breakout rooms, group discussion. The discussions will be for 20 minutes. We have Sagi Golderberg, who is also the manager of the Knowledge Center for Innovation at the Technion, and he's going to help us with the breakout rooms. And the system is that each panelist will be in one room, and all the participants will be randomly assigned to the rooms because it's a parallel session. It's the same topic in all 5 rooms. Thank you. And Sue is going to replace Xiao-Ping.
Great. So we've sent them here.
Sagi, how about the panelists? Are they allocated to each one of the rooms?
I've divided all the panelists, and everyone are in the room, and I'll give them a 5-minute, 3-minute, and 1-minute notice.
Okay, good. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.
So who is
All of you returning to the room are muted at the moment.
Sagi, everybody is back to the main room, or there are still rooms?
Yeah, everyone is back and we can hear you.
Okay, very well. Okay, so
Miriam, you'll need to share your screen again now.
yes, that's what I'm doing now. Yes, I'm sharing my screen. Do you see the screen now?
Yes, we have it.
Good. So thank you very much for the discussions, the panel discussions. Thank the panelists and thank the participants. I joined one of the rooms, and we had a very interesting discussion there. Thank you for coming back for the second panel, which is as interesting as the first one. And please stay with us to the end to listen to Aunt Sue when she summarizes and make the conclusions of this PDW. So I would like to ask each room, maybe one person to present one idea for how to bridge research and relevance, rigorous research and relevance. Anyone wants to start?
I can start in our room, and then.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in our room, we discussed about adjunct professors from faculty from industry who can participate in the teaching and also dissertation topic selection. So this kind of industry practitioners, they have very rich experience, and then to think about how the impact the students can have to influence our research ideas. So this is one. The second is we talk about executives from medical sectors, healthcare sector, and people, executives from hospitals. They only focus on one journal, and then maybe only one page of the research articles. So it is very interesting that we can sell or promote our research articles, research outcomes to the executives in healthcare executives or other industries to make sure that they also read our papers. And we also discuss about how to supervise doctoral students such as DBAs or executive education MBAs to see how they can link research together with industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. I don't know if we have enough time to listen to all the rooms, all the groups. But if there is one more group that want to share, please, this is the time.
Okay, maybe I will share on behalf of our group. We have actually 4 panel members in our group, or some from the next set of panels. We have many ideas, and they want me to read all the ideas. So there are 5. Actually, I'm going to read 4 of them because I think the other one is simple. First one is get research grants. Second one is get co-authors, get practitioners as co-authors from the very beginning. 3 is to work with PhD students with work experience. And 4th is to get editors with a broader perspective.
Great ideas, great ideas. Thank you, Anne. So I think let's move to the second panel. And the second panel is on from practice to rigorous research, the other way. Again, since Sitkin is going to present the panelists, the structure is the same one, 5 minutes per panelist, and then we'll have questions and answer, questions on chat, and then again, breakout rooms to discuss this panel B. So let's see. Let's listen to Sim.
Please join me in welcoming our second distinguished panel. This one focusing on how research that builds on practice in order to create research can lead to the kinds of impact that we're talking about. The first panelist.
Volume is very low. I don't think we can hear what he's saying. At least I cannot.
Ditto.
Volume is low.
No, we cannot hear.
It's the volume on your computer.
Yeah, this is Gary Latham. I can't hear anything.
Hi, Gary.
Yeah, perhaps share the voice as well. Reshare the video by clicking that button to share the voice as well.
Yeah. If you stop sharing your screen, Miriam.
Stop sharing screen.
This-
Sorry, let me.
When you share
let
it,
me stop sharing
the
screen.
bottom left that says, play computer audio.
What does it? What should I say? What should I? Bottom left is the volume, and what do you expect me to do?
The bottom left of the share screen where you choose what you're sharing, it says share sound. If you check that box and then share it.
The bottom left.
If I may interject here, I think Sim is basically introducing the speakers. I think we should just move on to the first speaker.
Okay, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, just move on to the first speaker.
Thank you. Okay. So,
and John, ready?
The first speaker is John Hollenbeck, and he's going to share with us about the relevant research via scientific rigor. And he has very interesting studies, as you can see on this slide. And John, please tell us about your research.
All right, hey, thanks. It's great to be here. It's great to see a lot of you folks. I wish I was there in person to see some of you. Host number 500, which is Gary Latham's new name. Great to see you, Gary. Wonderful to see you guys.
Thank you.
I want to start my 5 minutes. I want to tell the story. Hopefully I can get this story from front to end and then link this story to other things. One thing that Carrie Leana noted is that if you do a lot of funded research, it forces you to both deal with the intellectual merit, but also the broader impact. And so the broader impact, I think, is the relevance of this. And I want to start this kind of with a story. And the other thing I want to hit that Carrie talked about is where we as academics fit in a larger ecosystem. Okay, the story starts with a telephone call and it ends with a commercial that I saw during the NCAA playoffs. And telephone call, sit in my office, mind my own business. I pick it up, the phone, and it's the attaché to George Smith, who is a 2-star general in the Marine Corps. And what I'm learning from the attaché is that the Obama administration wants to open up all combat troops, all combat positions open to women. And so this is gender integration in the military to combat units. This is kind of important because if you want to get promoted in these organizations, there's certain routes that you have to go through. And if we close off combat positions to women, it closes off a lot of these routes. So that was kind of the initiative of it. All the services could either decide to accept that or ask for an exemption. The Air Force accepted it. The Navy accepted it. The Army accepted it. The U.S. Marine Corps wants an exemption. The U.S. Marine Corps does not want women in combat positions. And General Smith is, but to get that from the administration, they have to provide evidence-based reasons for why it's not feasible in the Marine Corps to bring in women. So this launches a program of research. And again, let's remember where this starts. This starts from the Marine Corps wants an exemption. They don't want this. Now, they fund several studies. There weren't just one. There's studies on physical strength, study on readiness, studies on morale, studies on a lot of different things. But we were asked to do one really small specific thing. And that is, what is the impact of having a gender integrated team on tactical decision-making accuracy? Okay, note that General Smith never asked me, how do you feel about women in combat units? He does not care about my opinion about that. All he wants to know is, what is the impact of gender integration? And many of you probably know this literature in terms of problem solving groups, an all male team, which by the way, in the Marine Corps, is not just all male, it's all 20-year-old young men, mostly from red states. These are incredibly homogeneous teams. And perhaps adding a little diversity will help them in terms of tactical problem solving. So Crystal Farr and I basically got a grant to study this. We were the mayors of Maotown, the military operations and urban terrain in Camp Lejeune. And we basically did a 2x2x2 experiment, looking at teams that were gender integrated versus not gender integrated, teams that were physical tasks and cognitively demanding tasks. So it's a 2x2x2 that you would all kind of recognize. Now, the only thing I was trying to do with this study, I was not trying to prove whether it helps or whether it hurts. I only wanted a study that when we were done and we presented it, both sides would look at this and say, well, no matter how I feel about gender integration, yeah, homogeneous decision-making teams probably aren't the way to go on any complex problem. That's all I want. And so I need to hear from both sides. I need to hear from the haters. I need to hear from the people that want this thing to happen, because the only way you can come up with a study that's going to make both of these groups happy is to really reach out and understand where they're coming from in terms of why they don't want this or why they do want this. So we do this study. It takes a long time. It just came out in AMJ. You can read it. It's about females' token voice in formerly all-male teams. And so it's not really a diversity study. It's an integration study. No women had ever done these jobs before. And so it's a truly different thing. Now, in the end, when we showed our results to General George Smith, he looked at it. He thought the study was rigorous, and he accepted it. Even though he didn't really want to gender integrate, he kind of accepted that study. And he kind of said, well, I would have liked you to have done that study after a 10-mile march. And I said, hey, General, we'll be happy to do that. All I need is another $1 million, and we'll do that study too. And I said, no, you call my bluff. I believe it. Now, eventually, all the studies came in on morale, on readiness, on physical strength. All those studies basically came in. And all I want to say is at the end, the Marine Corps withdrew their request for an exemption. They weren't overruled. They personally withdrew. That is, they changed their mind. Okay, now jump ahead a year and a half later, sitting on the couch watching my NCAA tournament, minding my own business, and a commercial comes out. It's a young 12-year-old girl, and she sees a bunch of big girls picking on a little girl, and she runs over there and she breaks up that fight. They follow that girl. Now she's 18. She's playing rugby in the rain, in the dark, and she's fighting, and she scores a touchdown. Boom, who is this girl? And then they show her again. She's in Camp Lejeune, and she's in basic training. Then they show her again. She's in Anbar province. Okay. The Marine Corps is using young women in their recruiting hands. Okay. This is how far that organization came from one place to another. Okay. And the only way you get there, our role in society is as best we can provide facts that everybody will look at what you did and basically have to agree with you if they're reasonable. Okay. But in the end, okay, I get hate mail from people who genuinely feel that women should not be in combat positions. Some of us for religious reasons, some of us are former Marine Corps people, for whatever. Okay, and so you got to recognize that so much of what we do is in areas where there's two sides to every one of these things. Contact tracing. I get hate mail from people in contact tracing. I have contact tracing organizations that don't want to talk to me because a lot of it, if you run it as a call center, this just in, it doesn't work. Police reform. I won't even talk about police reform on a campus of Michigan State University because that's a good place to lose your job. A lot of people don't want the police reformed. They want them defunded. And so in all of these areas, there's controversial things on both sides. Now, sometimes I work in applied context where that's not the case. We work for a facility for rare isotope beams. And I love this study. I actually got it. The study was basically looking at the impact of Semelian triads on scientific discovery in the area of rare isotope beam stabilization. God, I love that study. Because when I tell people I'm doing that study, they say that good for you, and then they change the topic because it's basic science. And so people are good with it. But if we're doing research that's relevant, a lot of the things that we're doing are very, very controversial. A lot of the time, some of the businesses that we're in are not actually doing a good job. And sometimes they have to be called out. Some of their work is proprietary. And therefore, we are a threat to them if we suggest that this isn't working or that's not working or whatever. So again, we'll talk more about different kinds of things. But you know, I think everybody wants to be relevant. I run a lab and I love my lab. But for some reason, I have this need to get outside my lab and do some of these other things that are highly speaking to kind of political issues in our society right now. And to the extent that you do that, expect to get some pushback. And the only way to get through that is to listen to both sides, listen to both the haters, listen to the people that really want this thing to happen, figure out where they're coming from, and then can you design a study that will please both of those groups? And one more thing, by the way, one more little thing. I got to get in an AMJ, and there's a totally different audience, okay? And so what you do for the Marine Corps is completely unpublishable in AMJ. And so what do you have to do to the study to make it work for that audience? And so the thing I'll say that's difficult about doing funded research is it's really like doing a study for two completely different audiences. There's the applied audience, the NSF audience, the DoD audience, but then there's the AMJ audience. And they are such different audiences that nothing that we put in AMJ ever made its way onto the desk of General George Smith. And with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, John. I'm sure there are questions on chat for you, but we'll save them for later. So our next speaker is Ellen Kossek from Purdue University, and she's going to talk to us about evidence-based work-family interventions at work.
Thanks, and go to the next slide, please. Good morning, everyone. As we all learned during the pandemic, work-family finally is relevant to everyone. And historically, maybe it had been thought as more of a fringe area. And I've been part of a lot of experiments, and I probably will start mainly with the Work-Family Health Network, which was randomized control field trials where you actually, we had, in my case, final round, 30 nursing homes. Half of the nursing homes, there was leadership training and being more family supportive, and half of them did not get the intervention. So it's the idea of comparing usual practice to whether there was an org change. Here, the practitioner is very much part of the research. They have to let you in to do a rigorous field experiment, which is very difficult in real life. It was also an area of work family where there is a lot of advocacy. Historically, the research was not thought of by the National Institutes of Health in the US as being very rigorous. It's holding back policy because the research is not rigorous. It was a lot of cross-sectional, how do you feel about work and family, but not so much how do you look at the structure of work and how it affects people's lives. It was an interdisciplinary project. These problems that we have today are so complex. You need somebody who's an expert in family studies, in public health, in workplace, in translation. We had Kaiser Permanente, part of our process, and employee groups looking at our research to translate it. And that makes it difficult, as John alluded to, for publishing and working together. The bottom line is we did find that just a simple intervention could improve employees' lives in grocery stores, nursing homes, but also high-tech workers. So you take the same construct from basic research, increase social support, and then you think about, as Carrie talked about context, how do you adapt it for social support for a grocery store worker or nursing home person, 24/7 work schedule versus somebody who's an IT worker? Lots of issues of scalability, lots of issues of ethics. Do you give the intervention done to the control group? I think you really have to. If you're a scientist, that costs a lot of money. And then how do you over time adapt and replicate? I do think public access for our data, once it's over, is extremely important so that others can build on the knowledge. So there is, at the bottom there at University of Michigan, about 60 studies that have come out of this. This was looking at support for work and family, social support. I've also looked at boundary management and was doing research on work-life boundaries like 10 years ago, and now it's finally hot again. But basically here also looked at if people understand their preferences for work-life boundaries, how does that affect their well-being and the issues of self-regulation. So it's sort of iterative process again over how do you change organizations and identify, is it support versus control? And it's not a one-shot process. It's going back and forth. But what's difficult now is then how do you compare the effectiveness of these interventions? And so Russell Sage Foundation, I did an intervention where I compared work-life support, where you have supportive supervisors versus work-life control. change the structure of work through policies, and it gets increasingly complex. And again, we need Harvard-trained methodologists and people on our teams to make it work. So to summarize, I do think that it's not so separate, research versus practice. It's iterative. You need to also build translation into part of the practice. And if you're really going to do research that's meaningful, but then as John says, you have to publish it, you need people on your team that are both expert at translating and writing for AMJ, but then also involving practitioners in the process as well. A final example I will put in the chat is we hold a research to practice conference every few years on diversity at Purdue. And the current topic is allies, which is going to be in OBHDP. And that very much is relevant to changing the workplace, yet theoretically, your topic is something that we can improve on for advancing theory. And so looking forward to continuing the conversation, and hope that work family continues to be viewed as a core topic of relevance on this journey.
Miriam, you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Ellen. We had different opinions than what we had in the first panel, and let's hope that we will discuss it later more in the discussion rooms. So our next speaker is Gary Latham, and I invite Gary to talk to us about listening and then responding to clients' concern.
Thank you, Miriam. Well, I've had two lifelong goals as an adult. One, I'd like to be remembered by my sons as a wonderful dad. And second, from the get-go, I wanted people to be able to say, I improved the lives of employees in the workplace. And I believe I've made good progress on both of those following one technique: just being a good listener. When I graduated from Georgia Tech with my master's degree, I went right into the American Pulpwood Association, and I just listened to what woodworkers had to say. Then I was hired after I got my PhD in 1974 by the Weyerhaeuser Company. And again, I just listened to concerns of employees. Then 3 years later, I found myself at the University of Washington, and I was recruited to teach in their executive programs and in the executive MBA. And to the present day, I find that I get great ideas by listening to what the managers have to say, as opposed to making it primarily a one-way conversation with them listening to me. Now, I chose 4 examples because I'm assuming we've got junior faculty and doctoral students in the audience. And the 4 I've chosen were published in top-tier journals shortly after me getting my PhD in 1974. And my belief is, if I can, so can you. So quickly, here are some examples. Arguably, racism is worse in the South than it is in the Northern United States, and certainly worse than it is in Canada. And Weyerhaeuser had signed a consent decree because whites were getting hired and blacks were getting excluded. Now, all through my master's, all through my doctoral program, I learned every reason why the selection interview was a bummer in terms of reliability and validity. But where the heck's the solutions? And I had read nothing on that subject. So it occurred to me, what if we had a scale, behavioral illustrations of what constitutes a good answer versus a lousy answer from respondents who are trying to get a job in the company? And then what if we gave people job-related questions where there's a dilemma and people have to decide what they think they would really do versus what they think interviewers want to hear. And the result was called the situational interview, where the theory is, coming from goal setting, intentions predict behavior. Now next, performance appraisal. The big pulp and paper companies buy their wood from independent loggers, people who may work 1 day, 1 week, 4 days the next week, etc. And they have no idea who is really good at what they do versus stink at what they do. And at the time, the zeitgeist was Pat Smith and Lauren Kendall's behavioral expectation scales. But with anchors at the 9, the 5, and the 1, that wasn't very helpful for us in assessing who's good in terms of cutting down trees. So we came up with what's called behavioral observation scales. At its simplest, it's just a checklist for self-management by the woods workers and a checklist for foresters in assessing who should the company work with. High practicality, double cross validation, and personnel psych accepted it almost immediately. Then, by this time, 1979, I've only been on the school for 5 years. So it's prior to that, 1977, when Weyerhaeuser has a wildcat strike. And an analysis by people in labor relations is that the bad guys in all this who triggered the wildcat strike was first-line supervisors, how they behaved, how they acted with unionized employees. So Lisa Sari, she was my doctoral student at the time, and I had read Albert Bandura's work on social learning theory, behavioral modeling. Oh, let me stop here for a caveat before I forget. In those days, I read the journals from cover to cover. When I say journals, there were only 3 or 4 at that time. So I read JAP, Personnel Psych, OBHDP, and Academy of Management Journal for ideas. And when I read the paper, I wasn't critiquing papers. I was always asking, how can I use this? How can I use this? So in Personnel Psych, I read some articles by Mal Sorcher on behavioral modeling, but he had never done any kind of testing in terms of internal validity and external validity to see if behavioral modeling worked in practice. Lisa and I did, and someone just previously said we need to train the control group. Well, we randomly assigned people to conditions. It was extremely effective. Then we trained the control group to see if their performance would come up to the original experimental group. It did, and wow, JAP accepted that one almost immediately. Now, motivation. To show you what a fun, exciting guy I was in those days, I used to go into the library every Saturday, sit there and read psychological abstracts from cover to cover on the part having to do with industrial organizational psychology. And I started coming across articles written by some young kid fresh out of Cornell University by the name of Ed Locke. And he was showing that if you gave people specific high goals, they would have higher performance on tinker toys and making words out of anagrams than urging people to do their best. At the time, Locke was receiving, not Locke personally, but the goal setting was receiving a lot of criticism in the literature for being solely laboratory based. And the rest is history. Locke and I published our first article in 1975, 1 year after I had my PhD, published in JAP, and we've been working until the current day. Now, goal priming is an exception to me listening.
Carrie, I'm sorry for stopping you. We need to conclude, so please give us your concluding remarks. So
I think it's a good place to stop. Thank you. So all I'm saying is be a good listener.
Thank you. It was fascinating. Mia, you're on mute.
Because I had many comments while you were talking, so I put myself on mute to be on the safe side. Thank you, Gary. I highly admire your work, as you know, and we'll talk more later. So our next speaker is Jason Shaw from Nanyang Technological University, and he's going to share with us some ideas on bridging from practice to research.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Greetings from Singapore. So most of you are just getting light, and we just got dark a few minutes ago. So I'll try to stay awake through the next 3 or 4 minutes. This is just a collection of thoughts that I put together mostly after rotating off as editor of AMJ 2.5 years ago, something like that. And that is, in recent years, I think we've seen a number of new methods and techniques and designs, and many of these have made it easier in ways for researchers to generate fast and perhaps easy and convenient samples of workers, broadly defined. And I noticed these trends not from what appear in journals, because if we just look at what appears in the journals, we are essentially sampling on the dependent variable, right? We don't see the other side, which is the flow of submissions and the hundreds and thousands of papers that come in across the journals. And one of the concerning trends I think we see, especially in micro research, but I also think there are examples on the macro side as well, is the over-reliance on what I would call context-free samples and generic survey panels and all-purpose measures and dependent variables. My advisor was Nina Gupta. Now she's retired, but she would call these fake measures. She's a little more harsh than I tend to be. And very short-term timeframes for even topics and constructs that, at least for me, should be viewed over a longer period. And the second thing is an over-reliance, I think, on the findings of single small sample studies. Miriam, could you change the slide?
Sure.
I see the title slide, sorry. Okay, so I'm about halfway through the left side here. I had another copy up here I was looking at. And as a result, I think this creates something of a disconnect because taking those types of samples and those types of findings out to practitioners and those in industry, I think it's difficult for them to see the links to their own context and sometimes to understand the importance of these detached and many times overly complex models, but also difficult to gauge the long-term potential impact in their own context. And as Carrie mentioned, I think in the breakout room a little while ago, I tend to focus on bigger projects in the beginning, industry studies and so forth, which take a long time. And I remember in the PhD program long ago, being really excited to start developing measurements and going out and collecting data when some of my faculty members reminded me that I didn't know anything at all about those contexts. So how could I develop measures? So we set out to learn about trucking companies and other industry contexts that we were studying. And it made all of the difference, I think, if you look at how some of those projects were received. I think it was because we were quite deeply embedded in those contexts after spending a year or two or more learning something about them before we actually executed the study. So my encouragement, especially to the younger people who might be listening, is when possible, really try to embed your research deeply in particular context and use tailored measures that are important to the people working in those contexts. And then the link between your research and what you can emphasize or translate to the practitioners later becomes much easier. And I would also encourage people to look at the best article award winners and the most highly cited articles from your favorite journals. And you'll often see here, often, if not always, that these are ambitious, highly embedded contextual works. When I had some examples, it looks like I'm going to run out of time. I had some examples from some recent best article award winners or highly cited works. One of them was from Carrie, Leana, her financial precarity and driving accidents study of truck drivers recently. Some of the things John has mentioned are really quite influential as well. And anyway, I think I'm out of time, so I'll turn it back over to Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm glad you emphasized again the importance of context to make it more relevant, to make more relevant the Rigor research. And okay, so our next speaker is David Yoakum, and he's going to talk to us more about translating Rigor research to policy. David?
Thanks, Miriam. Appreciate it. It's good to see everybody. I'm David Yoakum. This is my first Academy of Management conference, so it's fun to be at this. And management's not my area of expertise. I'm actually a behavioral scientist. I've been working in public policy for the past decade or so, currently directing the policy lab at Brown University, and also working in the budget office in North Carolina. Before this, worked in the mayor's office in DC, setting up and running a applied research shop called the Lab at DC. And before that, setting up a similar kind of entity at the federal level called the White House's Social and Behavioral Sciences teams, now there as the Office of Evaluation Sciences. And so let me just like scatter some examples of projects in your brain real quick. And then I want to step back and sort of think about some features to notice about it in terms of how the applied work is actually driving theory development and publication, and then maybe make a few suggestions about how you might do this yourself. So here's some examples. And this is a slide. I'm not going to actually talk through this in detail. I wanted to give you a sense of both a project early when COVID hit, where I get a call from the governor. And over the course of essentially a week, we had to try to figure out how to get a sampling program in place across the state to figure out how prevalent COVID was, which is a lot of decisions about how to sample, how frequently to sample, what sort of professions to sample. And the thing I want to just illustrate with this slide is the sense of pace over the course of 7 days, actually trying to answer all of this and get something in the field. Now, this is, of course, an unusual moment with COVID. The pace is not always this fast in this type of work, but it can be done if you have the need to do it. We also put in motion a survey apparatus that was doing monthly surveys of beliefs and attitudes. We also put in place a whole regime of testing different sorts of messaging via experiments for things like how to encourage testing, how to encourage vaccination beliefs. And that's one project. Another project example back in Rhode Island is with the Department of Education. We built a machine learning algorithm to try to figure out what kids were most likely of dropping out of school so that we could give notices to teachers and administrators about that. In a different project back in DC, when body-worn cameras were being rolled out on police officers, we designed and fielded the world's largest randomized controlled trial to understand what impacts, if any, cameras had on police-community relations. Back at the federal days, we ran a suite of almost 8 very, very large field experiments on increasing vaccine uptake. This was pre-COVID, but is of course incredibly relevant now. And maybe one last example in DC, when we were trying to figure out how to reduce the use of ambulance sends that really weren't necessary when someone calls 911, we designed and also evaluated by experiment a new program that if you call 911, you actually get a first consult from a nurse who figures out whether you need an ambulance or not. So that's a bunch of different examples. I'd make 2 points from it. One is that these get published in journals like Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, Behavioral Science and Policy, and so on. And the second is that part of the reason is that they're driving a lot of theoretical development. We actually figured out that, for example, on the COVID uptake, appeals to the community don't actually work. You need to apply to selfish things like your family or personal interest. For that machine learning algorithm that I was talking about, the new COVID experience exploded how the development was actually developed. So we needed a whole framework for how to adapt those kinds of models. We've published that framework now. And so the way we're doing this, and this is kind of my last little point, when I refer to a policy lab type of integration, at least the Yoakum edition of it, the way we're able to do this pace like this is that we've got a very integrated team. We've actually got scientists who are partly placed in the governor's office, in the mayor's office. We've got standing memorandums of understanding and data use agreement, so we don't experience the same sort of delays when we have to pass data back and forth, which can sometimes spark, whole weeks, if not months of delays. We also do a lot of programmatic things to kind of increase the cultural overlap between practitioners and academics, events and things like that we'll do in the State House, in City Hall, so that you actually have a common language of things like randomized controlled trials and whatnot that a police chief might be using. And we also have a very dedicated commitment to having practitioners and researchers at the table at the onset of a project to sort of jointly scope out what's a question that's worth answering and how are we going to go about it. And we'll write those things up, we'll publicly discuss them in the community, and we'll actually always have a commitment to publishing the results as well. And notice that, in my experience, this blurs what I'm describing, the distinction between basic and applied entirely. That's a distinction that really, in my experience, just doesn't play out. In my experience, trying to actually figure out how to make something like body cams work forces you to confront when things are breaking or not working the way you want. You have to go back to the theory development. And lastly, I would submit that the demands of rigor are actually incredibly high when you're in high stake practice moments like this. And so, for instance, I feel the demands of rigor, frankly, a lot more when it's something like releasing the results of a 911 experiment that literally has lives at stake relative to submitting to a journal article. And so we do lots of things in terms of, A and blue teams who do analytics, sort of replications of each other, a commitment to transparently pushing out the data that never get required or very rarely get required when you're doing journal submissions, but we absolutely require in the policy lab setting because of the implications for budget and lives, et cetera. So if you haven't seen this, I would encourage you to think about what you might be able to do with either government or businesses to do this kind of integration. And I would submit to you that you'll experience a lot of mutual benefits in terms of enhancing your own rigor, your own creativity as you do those partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's very interesting. It's a different perspective on rigor and relevance. And now I think it's our last panelist for this panel is Don Siegel from Arizona State University. And Don, the floor is yours. I saw you earlier, Don. Are you there?
I'm right here.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. I'm going to echo much of what John and Ellen said in their excellent presentations because they gave us great examples of grant work that can be both rigorous and relevant and end up in top-tier publications. I'm also going to take the idea that this is a PDW very seriously. So I have 3 things to say to the junior faculty here and doctoral students. And the first is that it's important to do grants, to try to do grants, number 1. Number 2, the context of your research is very important. There's a lot of potential to take advantage of the context to do the kind of research that Anne and her group is talking about. And the third is to make sure that you ask important research questions. And John and Ellen gave us very good examples of that. And I'm going to try to do that in my presentation. The context that I'm referring to is both timely and important, and it is the commercialization of research at universities, what some people call university technology transfer, others call academic entrepreneurship, the more trendy term. And this is important because the general purpose technologies that have transformed our lives, both economically and socially, like computers and the internet, biotechnology, laser technology, artificial intelligence, the Human Genome Project, all emerged from university labs, university research and federal labs. And there's a lot of potential for management professors to study issues that are of importance, both policy-wise, public policy, and managerially in this context. And this is a good example of that. Many years ago, I received a grant from the Sloan Foundation to study technology transfer offices and to try to explain why some universities transfer technologies better than others. And what we found, and I've been working on this with David Waldman, who's an AOM fellow, an expert in OB and HR, is that it's not the environment, it's not institutional policies that matter as much when you try to explain variation in performance. It's organizational practices and managerial practices. Now, we revisited this topic in 2014. I realized that there's this whole literature on organizational justice, which some people on this call have contributed to, which has not been applied in this context. And so we applied for a research grant to the National Science Foundation to study that topic in the context of university technology transfer. 2 papers resulted from that project. The first, I would encourage the junior people on this call to read, lays out all of the micro/OB issues that we desperately need research on in this context. And those are topics such as identity, motivation, championing and leadership, work-life balance, which Ellen talked about before, and finally, organizational justice. So it's all laid out in that AMP paper. And then the second, if you flip the slide, Miriam, is a paper that's coming out in the Journal of Applied Psychology, which in fact shows that organizational justice, how you treat scientists and engineers in an academic environment, how you treat them, how the tech transfer office treats them, how their administrators treats them, affects their propensity to decide whether to work through the university or to work around the university in commercializing their innovations, or whether to be involved in this process at all. Now, it's funny, when we had that paper go through its various rounds of reviews, the editor was very interested in the context. The editor said, well, it's really important to study this issue because of the policy relevance. And she pointed out, as we mentioned in the paper, all 3 of the vaccines, the major vaccines, were developed by university scientists. So getting these policies right, understanding how to manage this process on the part of the university, on the part of a federal lab, how to treat their workers fairly so that they engage in this activity is very important from a policy perspective, and we were able to argue that it's important from an intellectual perspective. So again, I would encourage the junior people on this call to think about problems like this. All the federal agencies now in America have a goal of advancing equity. So if you do research, for example, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, apply it in this context, and it will be very easy for you to attract external funding and hopefully top-tier publications as well. So that's my message.
Thank you, Don. I think it's very important what you shared with us today. I'm looking at the time, and it looks like we'll skip the 10 minutes question and answer, and we'll share the questions and listen to and share answers in the breakout rooms so that we can finish on time. Otherwise, we will not be able to finish on time. So I hope you all stay with us for the breakout rooms and ask your questions in the breakout rooms. Again, in each room, there is going to be one panelist who is going to facilitate the discussion, and you can, of course, ask this panelist also some questions and among yourself. So, Sagi,
we're good to go.
Our support for the breakout rooms, please send a trend on the participants. But the panelists, each one of them needs to be in a different room, okay?
It's done, yeah. So I'll give him 20 minutes.
So everyone is back? Not yet.
Not yet, but they'll be arriving momentarily.
Yeah, they are arriving now.
Okay, Mia, we're all back.
Everyone, we are all back. Okay. So because we didn't have time for the question and answers, we will. There is a possibility to send answers even after the session on the chat. Jeff is going to explain how to do it on the chat itself. But if there is one group that want to present one good idea for bridging the gap between rigor and relevance, please do so now. I hope there is one volunteer to do it.
Well, hi, if I can. So I think like I would like to share with kind of an important thing, like I believe like in our breakout room, I sort of like ask a accomplished senior scholar about one of my perspective. I tend to believe like in our field, we do not have much room to do basic research because the contexts are different, people are different. You know, people in the 80s think differently from the people in the 21st century. And so like it looks, I'm happy to learn like a very senior scholar kind of tend to agree with me. So we are applied field. We probably there is not much need to basic research, quote unquote. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think we're getting to the final time of this session, and we have the pleasure to invite Ann Tsui from Arizona State University to summarize and conclude the Academy of Management theme.
Okay, thanks, Miriam. I don't attempt to summarize the rich discussion we've had so far. So what I have done is I've prepared some remarks in a short video. And I did that because I got up at 2 o'clock this morning, 2 a.m. I'm not sure how good a shape I would be in. I want to be sure that I am coherent. So the best way to do it is to give my remarks at a time when I was more awake. So I have a video, and I'm going to ask Miriam if she would play the video for us. Okay, yeah. And my view is not on the camera, but that's okay. So Mia, would you please play the video?
Yes.
I want to thank Mia and thank all the fellows for the insightful comments about how to bridge the divide between rigor and relevance. They have offered many excellent suggestions from both the supply side, that is how to improve the practical relevance of academic research, and the demand side, how to improve the rigor of research inspired by practice. Every presenter offered suggestions on how to give more attention to either rigor or relevance or both. Now, I would like to conclude this PDW by sharing with you a movement that focuses on both rigor and relevance. It's called Responsible Research in Business and Management, or RBM in short. All the presenter fellows here are members of this community. And RBM's vision is that business and management research can be a force for good by emphasizing both rigor and relevance. On rigor, RBM emphasizes open science, transparency, and replication. RBM discourages engagement in questionable research practices such as p-hacking, hacking, or any form of data manipulation, and publishing only the best results that confirm or support the hypothesis. RBM also emphasizes replicating findings or testing theories across different sociocultural contexts and the development of theories unique to a specific context. So to develop valid, reliable, and inclusive knowledge in the global context is our responsibility to science. On relevance, RBM emphasizing choosing research questions or topics related to the major challenges of our world in a contemporary setting. While we certainly value the stock of knowledge accumulated from previous research, RBM encourages attention to the needs of society today, generating knowledge on business practices and organizational practices that will contribute to a better world for today and tomorrow. A good example is the Better Marketing for a Better World initiative by the American Marketing Association. The Academy of Management also have done similar things. The AMJ has published a special issue on grand challenges in our world. Academy of Management Discoveries published a special issue on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And most recently, the current editor of AMJ, Laszlo Tihany, has issued an editorial calling authors to join the conversations in society and not just in the literature. This is our responsibility to society. Now, RBM offers 7 principles to guide in the design of research studies that will meet both rigor and relevance requirements. Principle 1 is foundational. It is to understand and accept that the responsibility of science is in service of society and to not a small group of people with power or money, or certainly not to ourselves in terms of hiring, promotion, and job security, or even our reputation. Scientists are supposedly to be selfless public servants of knowledge. 3 of the 7 principles for responsible research aim to enhance the rigor of our research. There are principle 2, which is to value both applied and basic research. Principle 3, to employ pluralistic and multidisciplinary approaches. And principle 4, the use of sound methodology, both qualitative and quantitative. 3 of the 7 principles are for enhancing the relevance of our research. Principle 5 is on involving stakeholders at every stage of the research process, or even all the way to serve as collaborators all the way. Principle 6 is to ensure that our research will offer positive impact on stakeholders, and they include managers, executives, employees, customers, supply chain, or the community at large. And principle 7 is about dissemination and disseminating our research findings to the end users in a timely manner, understandable format, and through low cost or even free distribution channels. RBM emphasizes that we recognize the research ecosystem comprised of many stakeholders. The internal ones are the producers of knowledge, and the external ones are the consumers of knowledge. And RBM as a network has catalyzed many actions by many internal stakeholders. For example, there have been special issues in many journals on timely topics, the importance of society, many awards by disciplinary associations, including marketing, operations management, and even finance. And we also have changes in accreditation standards to emphasize the society impact of research in business schools. We have held several summits among stakeholders to discuss how to promote responsible research. And the latest one comprised of both internal and external stakeholders to discuss jointly how to collaborate and co-create knowledge that can be useful for business practices, policies, and improve the society as a whole. Now, for junior scholars, there is a new online doctoral course on the philosophical foundations of responsible research. And more importantly and excitingly, there's a doctoral dissertation research scholarship. They're offering up to 8 scholarships, or possibly even 10, at $10,000 each. The submission deadline is December 1st, 2021. So please go to website www.rbm.network to learn about these many exciting initiatives. So in conclusion, Miriam, Sim, and I thank the presenters for showing us that it is possible and desirable for our research to be both rigorous and relevant, that is, simultaneously. I know you share my appreciation for and are inspired by the excellent examples. So thanks to all of you for joining this PTW at whatever hour you are, and for your interest in and commitment to both rigor and relevance, and that is responsible research. So enjoy the rest of the day or evening, and best wishes to your research.
Thank you, Anne, and thank you all the participants, all the panelists, panel A, Kim, Xiao-Ping, Gilad, Rob, and Carolina. And thank you all participants in panel B, John, Ellen, Gary, Jason, David, and Don. And of course, our support, Moran Lazar and Sagi Goldberger, and the support from the Academy of, the great support from the Academy of Management, Jeff, who was with us all the time. And he's going also to put a note in the chat so that we can continue to chat also after the conference. I'm going to upload the most recent file with all the slides to the same place where we participated now in the session, and you can download, read it, do whatever is important for you, so that we can continue to think and to do responsible research and bridge the rigors and relevance.